welcome to Red Ice Creations Radio. My name is Henrik. If you are a regular listener, you know what we're doing here. If you're new to the program, check out our website, redicecreations.com, REDICE creations.com, and that will give you all the details on what we're doing here. Today we have with us on the line someone who I've wanted to speak to for a long time. We have alternative, I guess you can say, Egyptologist John Anthony West with us. He is behind the DVD series Magical Egypt, and he's written extensively on the subject. To name a few of his titles, Serpent in the Sky, The High Wisdom of Ancient Egypt, The Traveler's Key to Ancient Egypt, and The Mystery of the Sphinx. His website that you definitely should take a look at is jawest.net. That's for John Anthony West. So go there and take a good look around. There's loads of material up there for you. So with that, welcome to the program, John Anthony West. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Henrik, and thank you for inviting me.
It's excellent. I'm really looking forward to this. There's so much to talk about, but I do want to kind of run over a little bit of the background, if you will, for our listeners that potentially haven't heard about you or your work before. So if you will, tell us a little bit how you kind of got involved and how your interest got, how we got started looking at Egypt, as it were.
Okay, how my interest actually got distracted into Egypt is more like it.
Right.
But it's a long story, which would sometimes occupy a couple of hours on a bus in Egypt, but I won't go into a couple of hours worth. Just briefly, at a very early age, 13 or so, I realized I'd been born into a lunatic asylum, and it was a fairly shattering understanding, since practically nobody shared it at that time. Now, with the whole world melting down, right on schedule, I might add, just about everybody knows that the whole thing is insane. But I knew this way back when, age 13, that's 1945. And by the time I was 19, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the little boy who said the emperor has no clothes. And I started out in that direction, but with no thought of scholarship. Basically, I was writing satirical, creative work, a novel, a book of short stories, a number of plays, some screenplays that didn't get done, but that got written. And at a certain point, actually, on my website, there's a story called a short story called "The Emperor's New Clothes Continued," picking up the story where Hans Christian Andersen left off. And what happens in my story is that when the little child says the emperor has no clothes in the story, because it's a fairy tale, everyone says, "Oh, the emperor has no clothes." But in real life, what happens is that the empire regroups and eventually proves that it's the little child who's imaginary and the emperor's new clothes are real.
Right. That's a
funny
good one.
Story
that
got published in the now defunct Omni magazine. Anyway, so I was living, when my first short story was published, which is back in 57, I was working in Madison Avenue in advertising as a copywriter. And all of a sudden there was my first short story accepted, and I said, the hell with this, I'm not a copywriter, I'm a real writer. And off I went to, and then again a long story how I got there, to the wild island of Ibiza, which was hippie haven back through the late 50s. Well, that's pre-hippie days. I antedate the hippies. and it was a wild place, and a lot of people mostly getting stoned and drunk, and a few of us getting some work done while getting stoned and drunk, I might add.
Right.
And anyway, through a strange set of circumstances, I got interested in these subjects. First in astrology, through a good friend of mine who was a Dutch novelist, a very accomplished Dutch novelist. And then that led me, by a series of strange steps, to the Gurdjieff work. And that was and continues to be my home. But through the Gurdjieff work, at a certain point, I realized that to do the discipline, in other words, just thinking about stuff doesn't serve any purpose. You have to actually do it. It's like, a path is something that you walk on. It's like playing a sport or playing the violin. You can listen to it from now till doomsday, but until you actually do it, you're not doing it. So anyway, I wanted to get into one of the schools that followed Gurdjieff's teachings, and that involved getting me to taking me from Ibiza, where I'd already spent 9 years, to England. And there in my Gurdjieff group, through another strange series of circumstances, I got a contract to write a book on astrology. I called The Case for Astrology, now out of print. But I was convinced that through by now, a lot of study, that astrology was not a Chaldean, Babylonian superstition rationalized by the Greeks, but that it went back much earlier. And this was this basically was the same thing that Gurdjieff would be talking about on his take it or leave it basis. I mean, he's an extraordinary man, Mr. Gurdjieff was.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, here was this contract to write a book called The Case for Astrology, which is not a how-to book. It doesn't tell you what a good day to buy a poodle is or invest in a stock. Well, nowadays, no day is a good day to invest in a stock.
That's right.
But through somebody in the group, I was working on the history of astrology, trying to plumb back to demonstrate that it was much, much older. And somebody introduced me to the work of R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, the French genius with the unpronounceable name.
Yes.
And his books at that time were not yet translated out of French, and my French was pretty rudimentary, but nevertheless I attacked it, and for about 10 months, went every day across London to the British Museum, fighting my way through the impenetrable Schwaller with a dictionary by my side, and that ended up as a long chapter in the initial publication of The Case for Astrology. And once I got hold of Schwaller, I realized initially I thought he must have been a Gurdjieff pupil. They were both in Paris at the same time, but he wasn't. There was no connection between the two men. But what Schwaller was doing on the scholarly level was effectively demonstrating everything that Gurdjieff was talking about. And one of the things I must say that appealed to me about Gurdjieff was that he was the first person I had ever encountered, although posthumously he died in 49, who was as contemptuous of all of Western civilization as I was. And the difference was that he knew how to live in it, and I didn't, not very well.
Right.
So that was really one of the main attractions. And anyway, there was Schwaller, and I realized almost upon opening the book that he had done something of inestimable value. He had demonstrated through absolutely impeccable scholarship that the old belief percolating down from Greece and through the Renaissance itself, the belief that ancient Egypt was the source and fount of all of Western wisdom, this was taken as a matter of trust actually right up to about the 19th century, when the Church of Progress took over from the decrepit and degenerate Church of Rome. And Schwaller had actually he'd reformulated the sacred science of the Egyptians, of the ancients in general, because Egypt wasn't the only place that had this knowledge. The Chinese had it, and the Indians had it, the Mesoamericans had it. The difference with Egypt really is that there's so much of it left. I mean, you can actually go and immerse yourself in the sacred science of Egypt just by going there, whereas in all of these other civilizations, there's really very little left of them that you can experience. You can read about it. It's all there. The doctrine is all there. And the doctrines are all basically the same. I mean, they take it as a premise, as a given, that we human beings are not accidental glitches in an accidental universe, but that rather that we have a specific role to play, which is the acquisition of a level of consciousness that we are not born with, but that we have the potential to reach. And this is what in Egypt is called the doctrine of immortality, and what in other civilizations is called samadhi or nirvana or whatever. I mean, different names for it. But basically, it's the same doctrine that we're here for a reason, and if we don't pursue that path, we do so at our peril. And actually, it's very interesting where we are at the moment, because all of this this crash that's engulfing the entire world now, is a consequence of a fraudulent and debased materialistic philosophy. In any event, there was Schwaller, and I, in the first astrology book, I even though it didn't fit really, I put in a long chapter about Schwaller because, as I said, he hadn't been translated out of the French, and he was scarcely known in France either. And that chapter intrigued publishers, and they came to me and asked if I would do a book on Schwaller, and I said, you bet, because I regarded that as actually more to my liking and interest even than the astrology, which was partial. But the Egyptian doctrine was, you might say, a template of how a civilized society actually comports itself. So 6 years later, there came the serpent in the sky. And while doing the research for that, I came across a single line of Schwaller's about the Great Sphinx, that the Great Sphinx, Schwaller's line was, and of course the Great Sphinx of Giza shows unmistakable signs of water erosion. And that dropped the penny in the slot. Schwaller, that was in one of his ancillary books in English called Sacred Science, The King of the Pharaonic Theocracy. And he himself, I think, did not recognize the bombshell that he dropped. In any event, he died about a year later, because the notion that the Sphinx was weathered by water, I'm not a geologist, but I knew enough about Egyptian geology to know that the Sahara was a relatively new desert. It's been pretty much bone dry since about 4000 BC, and it formed about 10,000 BC. And I realized that if you could prove that the Sphinx was weathered by water, you would, in a single stroke, subvert all of ancient history as it's taught to us, which is that it starts off very primitive and it's all hunter-gatherers, and then at some point or another civilizations arise, and eventually we end up with our enlightened selves, with our hydrogen bombs and our bobblehead dolls and our Walmarts and our supermarkets. and I realized that if you could prove that the Sphinx, put it this way, for the Sphinx to be weathered by water, it means it has to have been built at a time when there was water in Egypt. And that takes us way back, without going into the details, but probably before 10,000 BC. So then you're confronted. Then you've got a big problem if you're an academic, or as I call them, a quackademic. It means that the most spectacular sculpture on Earth, the Sphinx most assuredly is, was carved at a time when there's not supposed to be any civilization at all. And perhaps even more important in terms of our modern intellect, the temples right immediately in front and adjacent to it are not huge as Egyptian temples go, but they're built of blocks of stone, fit into place like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle. That weigh anything from 50 to 150, even more tons each. So we couldn't do that today. Actually, we've done. I don't know if you've seen The Mystery of the Sphinx. That was the big documentary that we did with Charlton Heston. The experts in these fields, the people who deal with lifting heavy blocks of whatever these days, have cranes big enough to maneuver blocks of stone that size, but they wouldn't, in fact, know how to rig them. So, in other words, we're confronted with something built when there's not supposed to be any civilization at all that we couldn't build today, and we don't know how they built it either. I mean, this is quite clear. We don't know how they did it. Yeah. Quackademics insist that it was enough guys with ropes and levers, and that's how it's done.
Yeah.
But the engineers say, well, no, we couldn't do that. So this, in and of itself, really, I mean, it's a gigantic paradigm shift. I mean, it's very simple. There's the Sphinx, weathered by water, and the geologists all agree with this now, or most of them agree with it.
They do?
Most of them. Yeah, there are a few who don't, and those are sort of tame Egyptological geologists. And the big plan, maybe I'll get into this later, is to get over there. It's a long, convoluted story, but the idea is to get a panel of independent geologists together to go over there and to confront a panel of their geologists and duke it out on the spot, and may the better theory win.
Right.
So
right.
this we've got. This is part of the plan. Yes, go on.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, I just wanted to ask you regarding the water. One thing that always has puzzled me is how do they know at what specific time there was water and rain and so forth in Egypt? How did they determine that? Do you know?
Oh yeah, that's not too difficult. I mean, that's the science, or the sub-discipline of geology called paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates, and through all sorts of things, through analyzing the stratus, through looking at pollen counts, through looking at signs of water erosion, they can get a pretty good idea of when there was rain and when there wasn't rain. This has all been pretty well determined.
Right.
And in a nutshell, the Sahara forms somewhere around 10,000 BC, following the meltdown of the last ice age. That's another matter of considerable debate.
Indeed.
Somewhere around 11,500 or so BC, probably through some cataclysmic event, but still not proven, maybe an asteroid strike or something of the sort. The the huge ice sheet covering most of North America, anyway, Canada and half of America, starts melting. Siberia, which had been temperate, turns into tundra. The woolly mammoths and the rhinoceroses all die, and the whole Earth is in a state of chaos for a few thousand years. And when things simmer down a bit, then by this time the Sahara, which was fertile savanna, sort of like modern-day Kenya, has become desert. And there are a few rainy periods in between. From 7,000 to 5,000 BC, there are what's called the Nabataean pluvials, when it's rainier than it is now, but it's still not rainforest.
Right.
So, but this complicates the matter of trying to date the water weathering. Main point is that it is water weathering. The geologists are 98% in agreement. And if it's water weathering, it means that the Sphinx is, however it's dated, this is another big problem, actually dating it accurately.
Yeah.
But main thing is that it's a hell of a lot older than it's supposed to be, and it means that all of very ancient history has to be totally rewritten.
Right.
So Schwaller did not notice that was that important. So I picked up that cudgel. I mean, I realized that it was, and did all of my geology homework and wrote in Serpent in the Sky, the long last chapter, developing the theory of the water weathering, to which nobody paid any attention whatsoever. Not surprising when you know how things work in quackademia. And it took another 10 years before I finally found Robert Schoch, my astute geological colleague at Boston University, to come over with me, deeply skeptical initially, and gradually got convinced that the theory was absolutely correct. And eventually, something I hadn't noted myself earlier on, that the water weathering to the Sphinx is not floodwaters, which was the problem for me because, well, without going into why it would be difficult for it to be floodwaters, but rather lots and lots of rain falling down over long periods of time, coursing down the plateau and over the enclosure walls, and then falling directly on the Sphinx itself. So anyway, it took 10 years to find Schoch, and then eventually we did our presentation at the World Cup of Geology, the Geological Society of America's annual meeting in 91, and then that generated, through another series of bizarre circumstances, the big NBC special with Charlton Heston, and then we were off and away. I mean, then it was world press and a lot of noise, and the noise still hasn't died down. But you see, this is not a question. Obviously, the redating of history is a very interesting. Obviously, it's an interesting academic debate, argument. But I mean, finally, sometimes people say, "Well, so what? Does it? It doesn't get back my shares of Bear Stearns, and it doesn't help me with my 401k. So what good is it?" Actually, what's good about it is, what's important about it really is that this whole debacle that we're in the middle of now is the result of an idea. And the idea is basically a materialistic philosophy, and the more you buy, the happier you are. And so we're stuck in this idiotic society, busy poisoning the earth with crazy people running around buying a lot of stuff they don't need. If suddenly the idea changes, the idea, let's say, reverts back to the sacred science of Egypt, that we as human beings are here for a very specific purpose, and woe betide us if we don't individually and collectively try to realize that purpose, then all of a sudden the age of the Sphinx makes a big difference. I mean, it's not just academic anymore. It's the, you might say, it's the fulcrum upon which a whole worldview turns or could turn.
Mm-hmm.
And my own belief is that we're absolutely not going to get out of this chaos that we're in until or unless at least a number of people realize that the what I call the Church of Progress, the false church begun basically stemming out of the so-called French Enlightenment in the 18th century, which is enlightenment only if you think illumination depends upon electricity. Mm-hmm. This entire intellectual, philosophical paradigm has to be overthrown by not just the Sphinx itself, but by Schwaller's reformulation of the sacred science. So, in other words, a lot depends upon this. Is no longer a quibble just among academics, and the academics in their own way sort of recognize it, because we get a lot of flack out of this. An Air Force friend of mine says the flack is always heaviest when you're right over the target. So we get a lot of abuse out of this, which is fine. I mean, the level of abuse tells me how right we are.
Well, that's true. And I mean, you can't, again, we have big egos here, people who have been working on this kind of stuff for years and years. They have their degrees and their diplomas. They're not going to just roll over and die when some, newcomer comes along and tells everyone how it is, really, So.
That's right. Oh, yeah. I mean, this comes with the territory. And actually, if you're an outsider, I take it you are. I mean, what's your field? Do you have one, a field of study or a field of expertise?
Pretty much everything that I find out on the fringe, almost, if you will, of the alternative, sciences and history, and basically all of it that is of interest is things that primarily and mostly is not touched upon within the mainstream. So that's why we're here today, So
right,
yes.
Yeah. But in other words, you don't have anything to lose.
No.
So, because I wouldn't say it goes as far as compassion. I have very little compassion in me. But it's understandable why these people are so obdurate, no matter what the evidence is. In one sense, I like to say we're overturning the apple cart, and they make a living selling apples. Right. There's a story, actually I read it when I was a kid, but it's supposedly a true story, that really does explain it well. Because people always ask me, there's the evidence there, the video, blah, blah, this geologists, why don't they agree? Mm. And there's a story concerning the great violinist, Jascha Heifetz. And apparently, it's not, it is, Heifetz. But at that, when Heifetz gave his Carnegie Hall debut, that's in the 40s somewhere, at the age of 11, in the audience were Misha Elman, who was the then reigning violin virtuoso, and his pal, the pianist Artur Rubinstein. And about halfway through the concert, Elman turned to Rubinstein and he said, "It's hot in here, isn't it?" And Rubinstein said, "Not for pianists." So with us, so for the Egyptologists and the archaeologists and the anthropologists and the historians, it's hot. But for the microbiologists and the geologists and the quantum physicists, they don't have a problem with this.
Yeah.
But it's not their field. So for the most part, they don't dive in saying, hey, we know what evidence looks like in our own field, and what these people are presenting is real evidence. So lighten up. They don't, and they won't.
Right.
And they won't. And they won't until they're obliged to do so, which is what most of my present work is devoted toward doing.
Yes.
Obliging, whether they like it or not.
And I guess also one of the advantages, if you will, of what it is that you're doing is that you can bring in a whole lot of whole lot of different areas within your work. You can look at a wide variety of subjects in order to create your picture or your image, if you will, of ancient history. And in most cases, scientists overall are so compartmentalized. They are very specific into one area. And as you say, one might prove something on their own individual field, but they have not even looked up from their own desk in order to realize the bigger picture. You know what I mean?
But by and large, that's true, and they don't recognize that as a failing. To them, it's a virtue to be one-dimensional. So, so this is what we have to contend with. And for me, I mean, I'm on the outside to begin with, so I don't have anything to lose. I don't care. And
exactly.
And I'm invulnerable in that sense. I mean, they can make fun of, they can hurl abuse, but I'm much better at hurling abuse back. So actually, I enjoy it when they're abusive.
A good fight, I guess.
I like good fight. Absolutely. Intellectual samurai. The bloodier it gets, the better I like it.
Well, I guess also that that has to take place in one regard. We can't expect that this should be without tears and I guess blood in that sense, because this is a battle of history, and many people would argue that the winners of the wars and the rulers of the societies, civilizations that we live in, those are the people who are also writing the history about the world, and that means that they have toppled previous civilizations in wars and in bloodshed, and in one regard, on the intellectual level, we need to do the same with these people, then, to expose them for the crimes that they've committed, and
exactly,
in that sense.
Exactly. I have a good line somewhere, I forget in which book, that academic malpractice should be called a crime, and if so, there wouldn't be any quackademics walking around loose.
Yeah.
But
and also, I guess we can mention that a lot of people, they are on their own specific field. They are being tutored now in history. They know what they've been taught, so to speak, and with a good heart, they're just there doing their work and think that they are doing the work of of truth, of course. So, but that can be very difficult in that position, and they don't have the full picture. And what you're doing here is to contribute to all of this in order to slowly turn this beast around and say, no, look over here. There's more. That's right. More stuff going on here.
What's more, they don't have the whole picture, and they don't want to have the whole picture. That's the main point. Actually, this is where the problem is, because they're satisfied, as you mentioned earlier. They've spent 20 and 30 years getting their doctorates, and here along comes somebody from out of left field like myself and a number of colleagues and say, no, you're completely wrong. You have to forget about everything that you ever thought.
Yes.
And they don't like this. And I can understand that, but at the same time, if that's how you feel, then just acknowledge that what you believe in is a religion, not science, and what you believe is what you believe, and what the church tells you, that's the dogma, and you go and parrot it and continue parroting it. But don't say that it's science and that it's based upon a rational, let's say, a study of the available evidence, because it isn't.
Right.
There's the evidence.
So I want to, before we kind of dive into some more of this, the deeper aspect to your work and the implications of your discoveries, and begin to look at the ancient Egyptians and what they were into, so to speak. I want to just go back to something you mentioned at the beginning here. You said that the current time that we're in right now, in regards to the ongoing meltdown and the disintegration of I don't know if we should call it just Western civilization. This is a global thing going on here right now. But you mentioned that it was right on cue. Are you going back to the ancient study of astrology when you say that, or do you have something more in mind when you say that this is right on cue?
Well, at the moment, probably your audience is thoroughly familiar with the Mayan prophecy of 2012.
Sure.
And this is the end of a world and the beginning of a new world. The interpretations differ.
Yeah.
But right on cue, for me, means that, I mean, I've seen it coming for a long time. I'm simply been amazed that it's gone on as long as it has. And
Me too.
At the moment. Yeah, I mean, and a few things saved it. Partly financial finagling, and partly the introduction of the amazing computer. So all of a sudden there were things to keep the whole beast rolling along instead of dying when it should have died somewhere around the time of the Vietnam War. But so it's on cue in that sense, and it's even more on cue. Actually, I'm working at the moment with a good friend of mine. It's a website people might want to look up, named Gerald Salente, who's a trends analyst, and we co-wrote, my name isn't on the cover for a variety of mutually agreeable reasons, a book back in the 90s called Trends 2000, where we, Jerry mainly, but with my sort of, I'm the philosophical literary part of the combination, where we basically called all of this stuff, and now, and he really called it specifically, and if you go, people can pull up the website, which is www.trendsresearch.com, and get a good sense of where Jerry's coming from. So we're working together now, because after people laughing at him or ignoring him for the last 10 years or so, suddenly he's right, and he's almost the only one who's been right about this whole debacle. And what we see coming on, it's what I saw coming on all along. Actually, I might say, I wrote a couple of little plays back in 1960 that have been done a couple of times that are, now that I look at them, I mean, they're not just satires, they're practically prophecies. And in one of these plays, I have a sort of the ultimate businessman. He's a consultant's consultant, where when the consultants don't know the answer, that's who they go to. And he's suddenly stuck, and he doesn't know either. And the phones keep ringing in this little one-act play. It's General Motors, and then it's Exxon, and then it's so on, and they all have a question, what do we do next? And he doesn't know. So, I mean, I was right. The whole play is about a boy who finds the Phoenix, and the Phoenix burns and then doesn't rise. So I was onto this 50 years ago, and actually it's time to sort of upgrade that play a little bit and see if I can get it out there and get people to produce it. But really, so it's right on schedule in that sense. And Jerry isn't that much into the philosophical side, as not as much into it as I am. But even without the 2012 prophecy, the timing is about right. I mean, what's happening now is that this whole thing is unraveling, and it is not going to go back to what the economists call normal. Normal being the lunatic materialist society that's in the process of crumbling. So it is right on schedule. What is to come out of it? We don't know. We hope that it will be a genuine renaissance in which the old ancient sacred science is revivified and resuscitated in a form commensurate to, let's say, the demands of a new and technological age. I don't think we're going to have to get rid of our computers, to tell you the truth. But
right.
But the principles upon which the sacred science was formulated are eternal. And I might say, because we haven't mentioned this before, I regularly most of my income comes from, such as it is, comes from leading intensive study tours to Egypt.
Yes.
And it's in Egypt. I mean, the main thing of that Egypt experience is that after a couple of weeks in Egypt, you really do understand what civilization once was like. And I mean, then it gets complicated, because Egypt was at its high point, very close to its beginning. It degenerated over time, ultimately ending up in Greece, which is a much later and much lesser civilization, and then Rome, which isn't a civilization at all. It's basically a three-ring circus. And
why do you think it slowly deteriorated? Or are we then in the same position as they were, in that sense, that we're also letting things go, where it's slipping out of our hands, so to speak?
Well, this gets into the very interesting question of cycles, which of course is what that 2012 prophecy is all about.
Yes.
Now we go back over to India and the Yuga cycle, where there's a golden age. Plato talks about this too: a golden age, a silver age, a bronze age, a dark or an iron age, and then it starts going up again from that. So here's the big arguments. I mean, very interesting. Lots of scholars are working on this from a number of different points of view, and so far, nobody, I don't think anybody, me included, has a definitive answer for it. So in other words, where are we in the cycle? Maybe the best, I love using analogies. So it's sort of like that it's very difficult to to judge from our human point of view what other civilizations were like. This is why Egypt is so interesting, because there it is. You walk through it, and I mean, if your mind isn't blown by this incredible stuff, there's something seriously wrong with you, because you get a sense of what had been and what was lost, but it's lost because of a natural cycle of time, probably connected to the precession of the equinoxes. And as I said, this gets complicated. We could go 2 hours just on the question of precession. Indeed. But just to use an analogy, for example, you imagine a conscious and sentient creature that lives for just a minute. If that minute happens to fall at midnight and it's raining, the view that creature has of what life is all about will be totally different from a minute at high noon in Southern California, right?
Yes.
So then you go the next step up the hierarchy, let's say the cycle of the seasons, and you have a sentient creature that lives for a day. Well, if that day is in the middle of January and it's still raining, well, both of these characters seem to live in Wales, then it can have absolutely no idea of what a day in June in Southern California would actually be like, unless some kind of memory of that has percolated down through myth and legend, at which point our day person might simply say, well, that's a bunch of nonsense. That's just fantasy. What life is really like is raining in the middle of Wales in January, and we call it progress.
So you're talking about that our perspective is very limited, right? We get this short lifespan amount of time, and we basically can't look outside that, you know?
Exactly. I mean, we have our 80 years or our 90 or 100 years, and that's a day. That's more or less, let's say, roughly equivalent to a day within the 365-day yearly cycle. So we really can't get it, and the only way we can get it is, well, in part through study, in part through access to, some of the glorious architecture and art and music that's come down to us over the years. And of course, you get it in Egypt, more so than any place else, because even though other civilizations certainly had the same doctrine in their own form and constructed accordingly, there's almost nothing left. In other words, you go to China, you go to India, there's virtually nothing there from, say, 2500, 3000 BC.
I mean, they say that in Egypt, they say that there are pyramids. For instance, we don't have to digress and go into that all now, but there is some evidence and researchers that are pointing to the fact that there even are pyramids in China. Have you heard about that?
Oh, there are. Oh, sure.
Right.
Shock has seen those. Sort of mysterious. I mean, they're more like, I don't think they're stone constructed. I think they're earth, but they're definitely pyramids. Yeah. And access to them is difficult. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows when they were built or why they were built. Schock actually has written a couple of good books called, by the way, his name is Schock, Robert Schock, Schoch, called Voyages of the Pyramid Builders, and another one called Secret of the Stones, looking into the whole catastrophe theory and this strange phenomenon of pyramids all around the world. Yes. There they are, the ziggurats of Babylon, of Mesopotamia, and the much later pyramids of Mesoamerica. And yes, there they are in China. They're all over the place. But strange places.
But they're very well preserved in Egypt. That is a fact. I mean, do you think that has to do with the climate, that there isn't any rain, there isn't any severe weathering going on down there right now, except from the sun and the blowing sand, of course? But
mainly that. Plus, Egypt had and has, well, it doesn't have any more because you can fly over it and bomb it. But until relatively recently, Egypt was as secure as any civilization on Earth, bounded on three sides by practically impenetrable desert, and on the north by the swamps their own swamps to the north, and the Mediterranean Sea. So it was very difficult to invade it and conquer it. And at the same time, Egypt was blessed in another way, in that the food jumped out of the ground. I mean, nowadays they've got 70 million people in an area that should only support 25 million, so they've got big problems. But in ancient Egyptian days, along came the floods. The floods covered the land for 4 months of the year, nobody had anything to do. Sit around, no television. Sort of New Kingdom television was a bust, and so they were a populous, rich country with nothing to do but honor the gods, who, by the way, should not be understood as superstitious figments of the imagination, but rather as the embodiments or the materializations of cosmic and organic principles. Then the whole thing becomes understood as a science and not as a primitive religion. Oh. So this combination of factors made Egypt absolutely unique, and so there it is, all there for us to, as I said, we can really viscerally understand what a civilization was like by visiting Egypt, and it's almost the only place on earth where you can get that same hit.
Yes.
I often compare, actually, I say that Egypt is like sex. You can read all about it from now till doomsday and even look at pictures, but until you've experienced it, you don't know what it's about.
Right. That's interesting. Now, how often are you are you down there, like once a year, many times a year?
Oh, more.
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 times a year. The combination, as you might expect, the combination of financial meltdown, plus, especially for the Americans who are, in case you haven't noticed. Have you been to America?
No, I have not been, actually. I'm hoping to go there pretty soon, but we'll see how the climate is at that point,
Well, your English is brilliant, considering you've never been here. Anyway, America is not, in fact, the home of the free, nor is it, or the land of the free, nor is it the home of the brave. I mean, Americans are geographically challenged. They don't know the difference between Giza and Gaza. So they think, they're afraid, or a lot of them are afraid to go to Egypt. So the combination of economic meltdown plus, people come on my trips from all over the world, but sure. I'm American and my base is here, so more people tend to come from America than elsewhere.
Right. Okay.
So it's there. The trips are fairly underpopulated these days, unfortunately. But and who knows what's going to happen in the Middle East? But at the moment, Egypt is still okay.
Yes.
So anyway, I do the trips.
And this. To return a little bit to your friend Gerald Salente there you mentioned,
yes.
On one regard we can also say that he's been credited, if you will, for these forecasts of like looking into the Soviet when that right. with the economic system of the Soviet Union collapse and so forth. So he knows what is going on here. Yet at the same time, when he's doing these kinds of forecasts, I wonder also if that actually helped to spur things even further along and to make people more afraid if they come and look to this guy for more evidence or what's going on. Let's see what Salente have to say. So my question is, do you think that this helps to spur along the economic apocalypse, if you will, by the type of...
No, I don't actually. In fact, the opposite. Jerry and I are both, we feel that the whole system is dying and dead and good riddance to it, but that the possibility for a renaissance is really there. And it better be there or everybody's cooked. But no, it's the opposite. It's like you go to a doctor and he says, gee, I'm sorry, you're dying of terminal cancer. You say, well, you shouldn't tell us that. Now I really will die. What, do you want to know or don't you want to know?
Right.
And if you do know, maybe you can take steps. Maybe you can look for other things that will help.
That's true.
But no, the opposite. And apart from that, it's not as though, Jerry's getting a lot. He's getting a lot of press these days. And as I said, between us, we've been about 95% right. So there's really high time some people started sitting up and listening. But no, he has all sorts of, or he mainly, but both of us have all sorts of strategies where people who are aware of what's going on can at least take certain measures to not go, as Jerry says, good line, not go down with the status quo.
Yeah.
It's crucial. You have to know, if you don't know what's going on around you and what, in broad terms, what to expect, you're helpless. It's like, it's like knowing somebody says, well, you better get a nice warm goose down coat because winter's coming up. And you say, oh, don't scare me. I don't like it when it's cold.
Of course. Well, you're absolutely right. It's about looking at reality and what is happening in the world. And at the same time, I also feel that this is, from my point of view, if you follow the more conspiratorial view of all of this, I also see that there is a reformation, an economic reformation, if you will, going on in the world with all of this stuff going on about the will, if you will, from the people on the top to bring in a more centralized economic system. For instance, in Europe here we have the euro, and over there it's talk about the Amero, for instance.
The Amero, Amero, all of this stuff. Yeah, I'm very difficult with so-called conspiracy theories. I mean, it's a conspiracy theory if it happens not to be your reality. But yes, there's the Trilateral Commission, and there are the Bilderbergs, and there's 9/11. If anybody thinks 19 guys with box cutters brought that thing down by themselves, they're out of their minds.
Yes.
Yes, all of this stuff is going on. However, the deep conspiracists, well, if you go really deep into David Icke and guys like that, then it's sort of aliens, reptilians who are doing it and all of that.
Sure.
Icke's a smart guy, actually, but I don't go along with him on that. He's a very interesting character.
He is, yes.
But at what level the conspiracy plugs in, and of course is a big thing I'm sure you're familiar with, is just by the nature of the questions that you pose of the Illuminati.
Sure.
But that whole theory presupposes that they know what they're doing,
of course,
and can manifest it. I tend to call them, I think these are the idiots who don't know what they're doing, and they're caught up in it now too. I call them the un-Illuminati.
Yes.
And even they, no matter what they do, they are helpless against organized public protest. And actually, this is part of Jerry. We're doing this thing. We're getting out the Trends Journal right now, that he's forecast what's coming up. I mean, he forecast what he called the panic of '08, which is giving way, and it's already here, actually, the crash of '09.
Yeah.
And this is not a global recession. This is a depression. This is the worst depression, worse than the Great Depression, actually, in the 30s, because it's global, and it will manifest in somewhat different ways, but it's inescapable. And you already see, and this will lead, because what will happen then, the big guys get bailed out, what they call the too big to fail, the hell with the too small to save. But the too small to save are very numerous. And we already see, just in the last week or two, Jerry's been forecasting that sooner or later this is going to end up in a revolution. Now, we have a chapter, the book that we're planning, called Off With Their Heads. Now, whether or not they bring back the guillotine is hard to say, but there are a lot of angry people out there. And just now you might have read that a whole bunch of workers did a sit-in strike in a plant in Illinois saying, we're not leaving, you can't fire us, we want our vacation pay and our benefits and all of this stuff.
Sure. And
Obama actually backed them up. Well, this is what's going to happen. So no matter it's actually, you might say, it's a crapshoot. Will the powers that are trying to take total financial control of the entire globe be successful at it, or will they be stopped by maybe not necessarily mass organized opposition, but by an awful lot of opposition, maybe not necessarily organized, but enough to bring them down and to prevent their plans from coming through. Because otherwise, if they're successful, then it's not just it's a return to slavery, except it's not a slave state or a slave country; it's a slave globe.
Planet, yes.
But the hope is, and again, strangely enough, we've kind of gone way off course here, but strangely enough, this is where Egypt and the sacred science actually comes in, because it's one thing to realize that we live in a madhouse and that this whole materialist, stupid, rationalist society is a catastrophe, but it's quite another to understand that there is an antidote to it. That's the main thing. So if you know what you're supposed to do with your life and you take measures to do it, then you're active. Otherwise, you just sit there and complain. And a friend of mine, I'm not sure if it's Gandhi's statement or there's a friend of mine who studied not with Gandhi himself, but with one of his chief disciples, who said, "It's better to light one candle than curse the darkness."
Yeah.
Maybe so. I'm not so sure of that. In fact, sometimes cursing the darkness lets other people know that even though they're blinded by the electric lights, it's a pretty dark age. That's a
good analogy. And John, why don't we can begin to kind of round things off here on the first segment, and we continue talking about in the next segment about this. I guess what you would refer to then as the kind of the antidote to this, and we can talk about the ancient Egyptians and why their knowledge, if you will, is important and something that potentially can help us here in I guess the coming turbulent time that we're entering into here right now. But I do want you to mention your website, of course, but also some of your titles of your books, and tell us also about your fantastic DVD, the series Magical Egypt as well.
Well, the books, you mentioned the books. It's Serpent in the Sky, The High Wisdom of Ancient Egypt, which is an in-depth introduction to Schwaller de Lubitz's work. Schwaller is now in English, but Schwaller is a very difficult writer. So French, English, doesn't matter what language it's in. It's not an easy read. For those who really have a passion for it, you just take a couple of years off your life and bring Schwaller home. And it's easy in Sweden because it's dark all winter long. There's nothing else to do. and read Schwaller, but it's The Serpent in the Sky. And then there's the astrology book, but that's now out of print. I'm hoping to get it back in print somewhere along the line, The Case for Astrology. And then there's The Traveler's Key to Ancient Egypt, which is a guidebook to Egypt seen through symbolist eyes. And then there's the DVD series, which we're very proud of, but it doesn't make any money, unfortunately, organized by my genius friend Chance Gardner, because I gather you've seen that.
Yes.
And the graphics, I mean, Chance is absolutely brilliant, and on a absolutely shoestring budget put out this extraordinary 8-part series. Maybe we'll be adding other parts to it, but we're very pleased with that. I mean, if you can't get to Egypt, that's probably as good a way to acquaint yourself with the symbolist interpretation, as that's what it's called, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. By both detractors and adherents, Schwaller's interpretation is called the symbolist interpretation. And from the series, and then of course there's the Mystery of the Sphinx, the Charlton Heston DVD about the water weathering to the Sphinx, and that's basically it. Apart from the earlier stuff, which I had the money, I'd republish myself, the book of short stories and the novel and the plays and the screenplays, but they're just kind of sitting there and inaccessible. But the Egypt books are there, and if people want, they can, the series or the books, they can order them from me, or I guess you can get some of them you can get on Amazon, but they're readily available. And of course the trips, anybody listening in who wants to come on a trip, the next trip is February. I've got just enough people to make it go, but I could sure use a few more people. Actually, on that trip, oddly enough, that's a different trip. That's a dedicated trip. I have a trip coming up in January, but it's for a study group, and about half that group are Norwegians, actually. But that's not open to the public.
Right.
Besides, the Swedes and the Norwegians always fight anyway, don't they? So.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Not much. Anyway, so yeah, if you want
February, you mentioned, and can people find more information about that on your website?
Yeah. On the website, then you click on Magical Egypt Tours, and there's the itinerary, and there's, explains everything and the prices and all the rest of it. So anybody interested, give me an email, write me, and jump on.
Okay, tell us, John Anthony, about your podcast. You also had a podcast where people can go and listen to some of the work and the research that you're doing. Tell us about that.
Thanks, Henrik. Yes, well, I started this about a year ago, and I put new ones up in my own inefficient way, much less often than I intended to, but they go up there. I think there are 8 of them up to now. They're called Phoenix Fire. They're podcasts. They're roughly an hour long. And it's me going in depth into things that either would go in depth into a book, or perhaps into a video or something of the sort, but I have much more time. I'm at my own leisure, as it were, on my own recognizance, so I can ramble on in my digressive way about various subjects. So anybody interested in the, let's say, in the whole oeuvre can just pull those things up, and you can download them and listen to them in your car if you're stuck in traffic or something like that. And there's another one that'll be coming up pretty soon. Whoever pulls them up, you'll see the titles. The next one planned is called the Four Cowboys of Apocalypse 2.0, which should be an interesting one, because the four cowboys, people are probably familiar with the four horsemen of the apocalypse from Revelation: war, famine, pestilence, and death. I'll be discussing those, actually. They're a rather peculiar choice with the four horsemen. But the four cowboys have everybody, or have most people, shall we say, seduced into thinking that they're the good guys because they wear white hats and they go riding across the prairie. But the four cowboys of Apocalypse 2.0 are capitalism, patriotism, democracy, and technology. And they are, in fact, underlying the debacle that we're entering into now, but in rather complex and interesting ways. And that's what I'll be talking about in the next podcast. But yeah, so for anybody sufficiently interested in listening through our couple of hours here, pull up the Phoenix Fire podcasts and see what you find.
Okay, very interesting. Again, the website is jawest.net. Go there, check it out, take a good look around, and we're going to continue here talking more than in the member section. So for this section here, thank you very much, John Anthony West, for talking with us. Stay with us. We'll take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Thank you, Henrik.
Michael Tassarian and Blue Fire Film presents the long-awaited DVD film, Architects of Control. Program 1, Mass Control and the Future of Mankind. Now available at architectsofcontrol.com.